Welcome to Writers Read, and we have two writers reading today. We have Simon Ottenberg and Nancy McReynolds. And so let's get started with Paul's poem. I say a line and you say a line. Here we go. Write, write, write.
Right, right, right.
Until you get it right.
Until you get it right.
Then read aloud.
Then read aloud.
You'll draw a crowd.
You'll draw a crowd.
And bring us great delight.
And bring us great delight.
Okay, hi Simon, good morning to you.
Good morning.
I'm so looking forward to your reading today. But I brought something to show Simon that I keep on my refrigerator. It's the words of a song that was written by
a musician in Sierra Leone.
There we go. Who is also, is he blind, Simon?
He's blind.
Yes.
He's dead now. He was blind, yes.
He was blind. The first sentence and the second sentence and the third sentence have some meaning for me. The world is not bad. Some have something, and some have more than others. You have to do the work you can do. No need to be proud. And I just read that over and over, Simon. I just want to know that your words and what you've shared with our community has really enriched our lives. So thank you, thank you. And Simon, what are you reading today?
I'm reading something that I wrote recently when I had the virus and I was sitting around, not too bad and not too good. So this will probably be a paper that's not too bad and not too good. But it's called The Year of the Vegetables. It had not rained for a long time. Dust settled in the eyes of children. There was constant crying. A strong hot wind blew in from north to Ameta, a village in the southeast of the new colony of Nigeria. The British had taken military control by 1910, but were not yet administering the village. The yam tubers were barely growing in the earth's dryness. The time of the annual yam festival was approaching, when yams of the new seasons were harvested and eaten, but now they were small, the size of a finger. Yams, the basic village food, the penis of nurture, in a normal year weighing up to 8 pounds and in length from hand to armpit. The only food that males grew, a symbol of maleness, but this year the yams shriveled in the ground. It was the heat of discontent. Not that women's vegetables were doing very much better. The greens were wilting, the remnants of the year's crop were almost all gone. Pages. Sheep, chicken, and goats lay listless, thin, hungry, and thirsty. The village stream was like a piddling pea. The elders repeatedly sacrificed chickens, eggs, fruits, and bits of cloth soaked in medicine at the numerous personal and group spirit shrines. They consulted diviners and herbalists. No rain came, and the heat prevailed. In muted tones, the young man criticized the elders, the village leaders. They rarely did so outwardly. They now believed that the elders had lost their spiritual power. Without food, how could the village hold its annual dry season feasts, the title taking, the marriages, the initiations of boys and girls, the memorials. The village elders considered two high religious figures, Nachi, the weatherman, and Susu, the yam priest. The weatherman was an old man who lived with his wives in his shrine at the edge of the village. He caused rain to fall and clear weather to come, and he controlled lightning. The yam priest set the date of the activities of the yam festival, when the new annual yam's crop could first be eaten. And who lived in a neighboring village. Both positions were inherited, father to first son. They and their families were aloof of all village authority, including that of the ruling elders. Yet their wives and children went to the local market. Discussion was intense among the elders of a Mata village about the heat. Siaka complained that in all the years of his memory, he had never met a situation such as today. Other elders grumbled, and one of them intoned, "It is hopeless. Just a bad year. We have several times consulted 2 diviners and herbalists and carried out the sacrifices they recommended with no results. There is nothing we can do." Then Chuku, a prominent elder, quieted the gathering. Aguni, he greeted them. By tradition, we do not go to the weatherman who serves all the villagers here. He has his own ways, his own shrines, but now we must act. There is no rain. We need to smash this very serious situation. Chuku, with 4 elders, approached the weatherman. They were surprised how welcoming he was as they sat on dried mud benches covered with animal skins, with native clothes hanging on the walls, and a house monkey jumping in excitement at the rare visitors. After a prayer, they all chewed kola nuts, a common activity indicating peaceful relationships, carefully holding the nuts in the right hand. To touch kola to the left was an abomination, for it was the toilet hand. Chuku, who usually took leisurely pleasure in the preliminary ritual, was impatient. "We have come to ask you why the heat, why the poor crops, and why our streams piddle like pea." Nietzsche replied gently, "I am pleased to have you here. My spirits foretold your coming." Chuku pressed him, "I am pleased to be here and not pleased to be here. We ask you why the heat and no rain. The villagers have become restless." Without revealing his magical methods, Nachi told the residents of a spirit he could not control. Blocking his work. The visitors were surprised, for they had believed from past experience that he was more powerful than he was about the weather. "But we cannot wait," Chuku intoned. "We need immediate help." Nachi laughed. "The weather is slow business. You cannot hurry it. I will continue my efforts." The visitors left and told the gathering of the village elders the frustrating news. Some villagers thought that Nachi had become spiritually useless, They no longer thought of times in the past when he had brought a wonderful witness. Some suspicious villagers thought he had personal gain for holding back the rain, although Nachi had not asked for anything from the village. Still others were always skeptical of his powers. The elders discussed going to the yam priest, but since he did not control the weather, it would be useful. Finally, some elders considered consulting a famous oracle, Ebini. It resided in a village whose people spoke the same tongue, but it involved an 8-day foot. I'm not good at pages.
Yeah, they stick together, don't they? Coming. There you go. Good.
Journey, and it was expensive. They had all heard of some of those who went there who never returned, disappearing into slavery, or killed by the oracle, or facing other ends they just did not know. Eventually, 2 middle-aged men of the former warriors class in the village agreed to go, and Chuku, always an enthusiastic of the spirit world, agreed to direct them. For a considerable fee, an agent of the oracle living in the village agreed to lead them. Those elders in favor of such a trip, and not all were, pooled their cowrie shell money into raffia strip bags, for coins were not yet introduced into the village, and cloth for bags were scarce. Chuku's third wife, young and strong, agreed to cook for them. Shortly after starting, they became aware that groups from other villages with their own oracle agents had joined them. Now they realized that the oracle business was big business. Every morning before they traveled, Amate's village group had to pay the agent in cowrie shells before he would let them leave the spirits.
There you go.
None of the travelers knew the way. It was a trying trip, sometimes over steep hills and gorges and through swamps. Finally arriving at the oracle's home, they encamped, only to find other groups, sometimes speaking different tongues, also waiting to consult the oracle about the weather or land ownership, inheritance, poison, accusations, and even murder charges. They waited 4 days. Their agent insisted on one more payment to ensure their safety before the oracle. Finally, the agent led the 3 into the deep, dark gorge. They had forgotten what such wetness was like. They shivered as they heard strange rumbling sounds and voices. A loud, echoing male voice asked them, why did they come? Chuku explained in a carefully crafted talk, one that the oracles must have heard many times. There was a long moment of silence. Then he asked them, have you sacrificed at all the village shrines? Yes, many times, Chuku shouted in the darkness. But the heat is still with us. Have you sacrificed to the spirits of Ilefi and Umusu? No, don't know of them. Chuku responded. The voice spoke again. Shrines are shrines, but some spirits are more powerful than others. The world of spirits is not as you know it. Eggs are eggs, but some are rotten. There was quiet. And then there was another terrifying rumble. The agent said it was time to go. They returned home the next day, the next days, arguing over the meaning of the oracle's pronouncements and the two shrines. The agent agreed to establish the shrines and to help care for them for a fee. On their return, Shuku called together the entire village and informed them of the oracle, saying, they received various interpretations. The elders erected the shrines and prayed to them. The oracle suggested they waited and waited. Nothing happened. The heat was still there. Their agent could not say why. He suggested another trip to the oracle. But even Shuk had to wonder whether they had been taken. They would not consult him again. The heat remained. The elders were dismayed when they learned of the cost of the oracle trip and for erecting and maintaining the shrines. Those who were opposed to the trip felt vindicated. The days dragged on. One day the village men who were of the age that would have been warriors in the past gathered with Suku, their leader. They must do something about the weather. With clubs and machetes, they destroyed the weatherman's home, but did not touch his shrines, whose spirit they feared. Nachi and his family took refuge in a nearby village. This solved nothing, although it gave the attackers pleasure. Weatherman became ordinary man, only using his name, Nachi. His shrines were rotting. What can I do without my shrines, he asked. The elders of Nachi's village ordered the warriors who had destroyed his home to rebuild it. They reluctantly did so. He and his family returned to their new dwelling, although some villagers warned, do not come back until it rains. They claimed he was too old for the work, but he replied, I inherited this work. By tradition, it's mine. Until I die, I will not retire. 6 days after their return, the wetness began, the rains lasting for many days, turning dust into mud. It was too late for the yams to grow, and the yam priest delayed any announcement of the yam festival for a year. But the vegetables thrived, and everyone lived off of vegetables. For many years, the citizens of Ameta wondered what had brought up the rains, a delayed response from the oracle's two shrines, or the weatherman, or something else. But they were pleased about the rains. The time was remembered as the year of the vegetables.
Oh my,
That's
marvelous.
Wonderful story.
Thank you. Eggs are eggs, but some are rotten. I'm going to remember that line. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful.
Oh, wasn't it though?
Yes.
Okay.
Story.
Yeah,
Yes.
just terrific.
I don't know if I want to follow that.
Hi, Nancy McReynolds. So glad you're here today to read, really. And earlier in the week, I wrote you an email and I said, Nancy, might you share an early memory of reading, either somebody reading to you or you reading?
Sure. I've been a reader as long as I can remember. I could hardly wait to go to school so I could learn to read, and remember bringing the Dick and Jane Puffin spot books home to read to my mother. I had a much older sister, to be exact, 24 years older than I, who instilled in me the love of reading. Every year I could plan on a carefully selected book at birthdays and Christmas, which I've continued that tradition with my own family.
Oh, good, Nancy, what a good memory.
At any rate, that's where it is.
Okay, thank you so much. And what are you reading for us today?
Well, I have a couple of family stories.
Oh, good, good.
And I'll tell you a little bit about how I started writing those.
Good, that's helpful information. You may start right now.
All right.
Okay.
In recent years, I have become the writer of family stories. This all began with our two grandchildren, both girls, Claire and Maddie. When each of the girls were 12 years old, we took them on a major trip. One of our choice, not theirs. We took them to New England, more specifically Maine, with several days in Boston before we flew home. On each trip, we were gone about 2 weeks or a little more. When we took Maddie, the younger of the two girls, she got a bit homesick and would tear up as I tucked her into bed at night. Along about the third or fourth night, my response was, "Maddie, do I need to give you another pep talk?" She replied, "Grandma, I just need you to tell me your stories." Although I was born and raised in Seattle, my maternal grandparents lived in a very small town in Maine, Dixfield to be exact. As I was growing up, I spent several summers visiting these grandparents and look upon those times with very fond memories. It was stories of these visits that I told as we drove the country roads of rural New England. I am the youngest of 6 children and the only surviving member of my generation. With Maddie's comment, I began to realize that if I didn't capture the family stories in writing, they would be lost forever. Not only were they important to my children and grandchildren, but also to my multitude of nieces and nephews. My new career as a writer had begun.
Wonderful. Oh.
So, this is my first story. It's entitled College Days with Dad. My father and I were college students at the same time. Dad enrolled at the University of Washington in the fall of 1952 at the age of 66. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree with a major in English literature in June of 1958 at the age of 72. I enrolled in the University of Washington in the fall of 1953 at the age of 17 and graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in accounting in June of 1957 at the age of 20. During the 4 years that we were both students, Dad drove us to school every morning for our 8 o'clock classes. Depending upon our schedules, we shared the ride home, or I took the city bus. We both enjoyed the privilege of on-campus parking because Dad qualified for handicap parking. Dad and I developed a special relationship during this time. When Dad retired from the California Packing Corporation in 1951, he had no hobbies and was severely disabled with arthritis. Not a good combination. He and my mother attempted a road trip. It was disaster. They came home early. My mother didn't drive. Driving was very difficult for my dad. Unfamiliar beds were not comfortable, and he was not very mobile on foot. After several months of idleness, including sitting in a rocking chair in our front window, long afternoon naps, which resulted in not being able to sleep at night, and attempting to supervise my mother announced one morning, "Bill, you are out of here until you find something to do. Anything, but definitely something." My dad got dressed and left the house. It was anyone's guess as to for how long it would be. A few hours, several days, or perhaps months. At the end of the day, Dad returned and sat down to the table for dinner. He told Mom and I he had an announcement to make. I was hoping it wasn't divorce. Instead, he announced that he had enrolled at the University of Washington as a first-year student in the School of Business. Dad began his college studies 40 years earlier at the University of Maine. His education was interrupted for financial reasons and World War I. He put high value on education and made sure that all of their 6 children had the opportunity to earn a college degree. With only one child to go, it was his turn. My father was an Army veteran of World War I. He found that, as a result, he was entitled to educational benefits. There was a program for World War I veterans that was similar but not inclusive as the GI Bill for World War II veterans. However, unlike the GI Bill, there was no expiration date. As long as there were World War I veterans alive, they were entitled to educational benefits. My father qualified. With his 6th child to enter college in another year, this made education for him possible. On the advice of a wise counselor, he soon changed his major from business to the School of Arts and Sciences with a major in English literature. A whole new world was opened up to him. He immersed himself in Chaucer, Shakespeare, Dickens, and many other great writers in history. He and my mother's bridge schedule now revolved around Dad's study hours and final exams. They could attend Husky football games, sitting in the student section, with handicapped parking to boot. Mother was now free to run the household without Dad's interference. They even joked about perhaps Dad should join a fraternity. After all, son John had been an Alpha Sigma Phi. That made Dad a legacy. Life was good. Graduation day on June 14, 1958 was a day to remember. Dad's picture, along with this story, appeared on the front page of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer.
Oh my.
Mother made sure that his graduation gown was pressed and ready to go. Our entire family, 6 children with spouses and grandchildren, gathered, filling the better part of a section of the gallery at Heck Edmondson Pavilion. To the tune of pomp and circumstance, Dad came down the aisle with hundreds of other graduates. When it was his turn, and with the assistance of 2 canes and a lot of cheering from the balcony, he made it across the stage to receive his diploma. He smiled. The rest of us cried. He had achieved his goal. The following fall, he returned to the University of Washington with the hope of working toward a master's degree. That was not to happen. He soon decided that his arthritis was becoming too painful and that driving was no longer an option. He gave his car to one of his daughter-in-laws and called it quits. He would be content with reading the rest of the great masters.
Oh my. Oh, Nancy, that is a wonderful story. Just
So,
amazing.
would you like me to read another story?
I'd love to hear another one.
Well, first of all, you have to meet the
that's
main
right.
character. How's that?
Now, is that all right? Looks good. Nancy?
Go ahead.
Yes? Yeah.
All right. I want you to meet Wilbur. Wilbur joined our family in August of 1995. Wilbur stands a little more than 3 feet tall and is a doll, a rather human-appearing doll. I first met Wilbur on a trip to Maine when I was searching for the Stanley family vacation home on Weld Pond. In my quest for the location, I visited Dorothy Schofield, who lived in the town of Weld, knew my grandparents, and would be able to answer my questions. Dorothy was able to help me, but of almost more interest to me were the dolls that she made. I was fascinated by them and inquired about adopting one. I made my selection, paid a modest adoption fee, and Wilbur was mine. For the remainder of the trip, Wilbur sat in the passenger seat of my rented automobile. He rode in the overhead bin on the airplane back to Seattle. Wilbur immediately became a member of our family. He spent most of his time in a high-back antique chair with a wicker seat in our living room. He was obedient, never talked back, and did what he was told. Occasionally, when we had large gatherings, he was put on the bed in our guest bedroom, where guests usually laid their coats. He startled many a guest. The only family member that didn't initially bond with Wilbur was Claire, our oldest granddaughter. Once she became a toddler, she was terrified of him.
Oh my.
He was way too realistic.
Mhm.
She would peek at him from around a corner or under the barroom doors from our kitchen, but she kept her distance. One Sunday, when her family were coming to our house for dinner, I received a phone call from her mother, Katie. Claire was refusing to get in the car for the trip to our house in Bellevue. I don't like Grandma's doll. I packed up the dinner and took it to their house in Seattle. I explained to Claire that it was important to us that she come to visit and asked what needed to change in order for that to happen. Wilbur has to go away, was the answer. The decision was made. Wilbur would be moving out. Claire agreed to come to our house to witness the transition. They drove into our driveway, but Claire stayed in the car. She watched me put Wilbur into a large garbage bag and put him on the back seat of our car. We drove in tandem to our remote storage locker where I placed him inside, pulled down the door, and fastened the lock. Claire was satisfied and agreed that trips to Grandma and Grandpa's were again a fun experience. Then our next granddaughter, Maddie, came along. Maddie was fearless, and Claire had grown up a bit. Together they agreed that Wilbur could move back home.
Oh, wonderful.
They soon found him to be great fun to play with. I was delighted. One day I witnessed Claire holding him by his feet, and Maddie his hands, and they were swinging him back and forth and back and forth. My reaction, poor Wilbur. Maddie responded by saying, "Grandma, Wilbur is dead." Wilbur now resides as caretaker of our Leavenworth vacation home. He is good entertainment for guests and would scare away any intruder. One day, perhaps, he will be moving to Horizon House.
I'm so glad we can see Wilbur in this picture. Thank you so much.
He is a little scary.
Nancy. Oh, goodness.
That's
And
good.
to end this session,
Very nice.
thank you, Nancy McReynolds, so much for those good stories, and to Simon for his good story. But I wanted to just say a couple of things, because this is the last recording session in this series. We will start again in the fall, so start writing, everybody. Get ready to volunteer to be on Writer's Read in the fall. This is the book you can read while we're not showing Writer's Read. It's on the windowsill in the library, in the back of the library, and so many people have contributed their writing. And we will hopefully get Nancy's and Simon's writing in this 3-ringed binder. Take care. Have a good summer.